Hello, welcome to ALZ Talks. I'm Tiffany Favors, a clinical team lead with the 24/7 Alzheimer's Association helpline. The vision of the Alzheimer's Association is a world without Alzheimer's and other dementias. The Alzheimer's Association is the leading voluntary health organization in Alzheimer's care, support, and research. Thank you for joining us today to talk about home safety tips. I am excited to facilitate the conversation today with one of our care consultants on the helpline to talk about home safety tips and how we approach safety conversations when you call the helpline. This webinar series is supported by Procter Gamble and is organized and arranged by the Alzheimer's Association. Joining me today is Kristen Murphy, LMSW, who is a care consultant with the 24/7 helpline. Kristen, why is home safety so important for people with Alzheimer's and other dementia?
Yeah, thank you for having me. Hi, everyone. It's a good question. I'm glad we're talking about safety today. It's definitely a big topic when it comes to folks living with the disease and their loved ones. It's a topic that does come up a lot because of a lot of the symptoms that come along with this disease sometimes can lead to different safety concerns potentially. We'll go into more detail, but some quick examples would include when someone with the disease has maybe poor judgment, their decision making, or their reasoning abilities are a bit off. That sometimes can lead to safety concerns. Their perception of reality is a bit skewed. That can be a challenge. And also just their forgetfulness or the repetitive nature of some of these symptoms sometimes can lead to concerns about safety. And also the fact that we're generally talking about older adults here. As someone does age, there can be, a lot of changes that come along that can present other challenges in terms of their changing ability to ambulate, maybe falls being more likely. So it's definitely a hot topic for a lot of reasons.
Thank you. And why does safety change during the progression of this disease?
Yeah, it changes a lot. Someone in the early stage of the disease in general is going to be very different from someone in the later stage of the disease in terms of the symptoms we see, in terms of their functioning and their ability levels. And a big part of that can be, how independent someone is earlier on versus later on. As the disease does progress, the individual probably will need more and more assistance with different things. If they don't receive the assistance they need, sometimes that can lead right to some different safety concerns. Another component of that as well can be if the person living with the disease is not always able to recognize as much what exactly it is that they're going through, which we see that happen more as someone progresses. And in that case, we'd want to make sure that the caregivers themselves, they know what to be looking out for so they can feel equipped to kind of step in as needed and make sure they're taking steps to keep their loved ones safe.
Yeah, I think that all makes so much sense. As we're talking about safety, one of the things that we also think about is that safety is a way to support a person's independence who's living with this disease. And as we're doing that and going through our home safety checklist, we want to evaluate and adjust our environments as needed. And as you mentioned, with the disease progression changing, that we need to continuously make these changes throughout the disease as a person's continuing to live with them. So a person living with dementia may be prone to additional safety hazards in specific areas of the house, the kitchen, bathrooms, garages, basement, and outdoor spaces as well. So we want to make sure that we're monitoring all of these spaces, workrooms, and anywhere else that there may be tools, chemicals, cleaning supplies, weapons, or anything else that is potentially hazardous or harmful. Another thing we want to keep in mind is lighting in our homes and what that looks like. Changes in lighting levels can be disorienting and confusing and can also result in frightening and difficult experiences for persons living with this disease. Changes in lighting can also trigger episodes of sundowning or make a difficult situation harder to manage. So we want to think about keeping things like our homes well lit. One thing that can help with that is automatic timers. So using smart plugs or smart hubs that can have lights turned on at a certain point in time, or that you can ask to turn the lights on to avoid things like shadows, which we know shadows can be triggering for sundown and can be also difficult for a person to sit with. Another thing we want to keep in mind are things like having certain things put away as much as possible. Two of the really big things here are guns and medication. As we're thinking about using guns, a person with dementia may no longer be able to safely operate a gun or another type of weapon. And that's one reason we want to make sure that they're put away. Another thing is concerns about recognizing people who are coming in and out of their home, whether this be loved ones, this be hired help or paid caregivers who are coming in, can definitely present a safety concern. and potentially create a dangerous situation if the person isn't as sure of who's coming in and out of their home. So we want to make sure that we're considering factors such as this. Guns and other weapons should be removed from the home, or at a minimum, they should be locked up and put away and are out of reach for any person who is living with dementia. In terms of medications, we also want to keep medications out of reach as much as possible. If a person is still able to take their own medications, some of the best bets are to get those daily little trays, little pill cases that you can put the medications in for each day or certain times of the day to use it. That way, it can help a person remember that they have taken their medicine for that time of day and only take them for that one time. Once a person is no longer able to distribute their own medicines or remember that they've taken them, it becomes even more important that we are putting medications away and keeping them out of reach to ensure that a person is taking their medications as prescribed, that they're not taking too much or too little, or forgetting when they have taken their medications and taking them at different times of the day, the wrong times of day, or just too often as well. Another thing that you had also mentioned here, Kristen, is reducing falls risk. So things to help with reducing falls risk include taking out area rugs, extension cords, and reducing excessive clutter throughout your home. In bathrooms, this can look like ensuring there are grab bars by bathtubs and showers and toilets. In other areas of your home, it can be making sure that chairs have arms that a person can use to support themselves when standing or sitting. In addition, to spaces such as the bathroom or the kitchen where there may be slippery surfaces, having texturized stickers that can help a person better keep their grip and see an area is also really helpful. We do know that bathrooms create additional risk for falls, and we know that falls, though not necessarily a part of the disease, can create additional problems for someone managing the disease or the care that may be happening. So we're wanting to make sure that we're reducing the risk for falls as much as possible. Kristen, can you talk to us about creating a care plan for persons living with dementia?
Definitely. And those were all really, really great ideas, touching on a lot of big topics when it comes to safety. So that was all helpful. Yeah, when it comes to the disease in general, like we mentioned before, as things do progress, you probably want to continue to revisit the care plan for someone with the disease. Care plan is a broad term, but essentially, we'd be looking at what the living situation is, what help and care is in place, the level of supervision and assistance that's provided to someone. These are examples of things that likely do need to change as someone continues to progress through the disease. There's two additional pretty major topics when it comes to safety that really relate to maybe needing to change the care plan. The first one I'll talk a bit about is kitchen safety, safety issues that come up within the kitchen. A main one being a potential fire hazards, for several different reasons. Sometimes someone with the disease could be more likely to make mistakes right in the kitchen. I mean, due to forgetfulness, right? Something like leaving the stove on, due to the issues maybe with some poor judgment, putting things in the microwave or the oven that shouldn't be going in there, right? These might be examples of things that potentially could lead to some fire hazards. So ideas that folks probably want to keep in mind to mitigate those concerns. You'd want to ensure that smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors are working, they're up to date. We want to be checking those, fairly regularly. We want to make sure that there's a fire extinguisher available and accessible to the person, within their living environment. If it's necessary as well, we've definitely heard of folks taking additional steps in the kitchen, even putting special types of locks on the stove, disabling the stove at some point might even be necessary. So again, as the disease progresses, kind of want to find the level of the intervention, right, that is the most appropriate. When it comes to other things sort of within the kitchen in general to be thinking about, just keeping in mind how someone's doing with eating and keeping up with remembering to eat, eating the right amount, keeping up with their nutrition, cooking, right, can become challenging. So as the disease progresses, oftentimes an adjustment in a care plan might be just taking that responsibility off of that person's plate, right? So how can we ensure that they're still getting the food and the meals that they need? And then also we want to make sure that there's no expired food, right, in the fridge and things like that. So regularly kind of keeping an eye on those issues would be a good step to consider. And then another major topic when it comes to safety, and especially one that relates to maybe needing to adjust the care plan, would be dealing with the symptom of wandering. And wandering is a very common symptom of the disease. It can happen for different reasons. It's essentially when someone with the disease, right, is leaving the home, for different reasons. Sometimes that happens because they're not recognizing that they're in their home. Maybe they think they live elsewhere. If they're not recognizing the person they're living with or who's coming into the home, they might be thinking, right, in that confusion that they need to be going somewhere else. And oftentimes we do see wandering happening more so during that sundowning period. So later in the day or at nighttime. If that's happening, obviously it can lead to a lot of different safety concerns. And I would say wandering is one of the main reasons why, as the disease progresses, an increased level of supervision oftentimes is needed for the person living with the disease. So we would need to adjust the care plan there. That can look like, the setup there can be arranged in many different ways. If the person's living at home, do we need to have loved ones coming in more frequently to provide them with that supervision? Do we need to be utilizing some home care assistance to bring some professional help into the home to make sure that person is not left alone, especially at those tough times of day? Or it could even look like moving our loved one out of the home into some type of residential care setting. Keep in mind, if we would be looking at some type of memory care unit within a residential care setting, oftentimes that it would be a locked unit for that reason, oftentimes because of the wandering. There could be other interventions when it comes to wandering as well, in terms of being on the lookout for certain warning signs of wandering potentially that it could happen, right? So if someone is talking about needing to go home, they seem more restless, if they're pacing, if they're packing up their stuff to leave, if they're opening the door, those are warning signs we want to be on the lookout for. And we also probably want to make other adjustments to the home as well, in terms of adjusting locks or alarms, right, on the doors. Keep in mind the recommendation there would be to keep locks out of sight, right? So pretty high or pretty low, for example, so that person would not be able to easily access that. And keep in mind, if there would be more of an emergency type of situation when it comes to wandering or anything else, hey, having a bit of a safety plan in place, knowing we can call 911, for example, would also be something to think about.
What are some other really common safety related calls that we get at the helpline?
Yeah, so we've touched on a lot of them already, but there's a few other ones I'm thinking about. A main one tend to be driving. The combination of someone with dementia being behind the wheel as the disease progresses can become challenging. Again, this is a good example where someone early on in the disease, maybe doing just fine driving, as we progress, probably makes sense that that person likely would need to stop driving at some point. There can be a lot of reasons why that's the case, different changes and things to be on the lookout for to maybe know it might be time, right, to step in with the with the driving, would be if someone is getting lost, especially in familiar places, right, places they kind of should know how to be going to. If they're having trouble staying in their lane, getting into a parking spot, maybe incorrectly, a slow reaction time can lead to safety concerns, getting into accidents, forgetting where they park their car, etc. Those are some of the common changes we see and challenges when it comes to driving. It's not an easy thing to intervene with. We're aware of that. We could probably talk for a long, long time about intervening with driving. Again, it's definitely a common call that we get. So when folks reach out to us, we definitely kind of put our heads together with them to try to come up with a bit of an action plan for how you'd want to intervene with driving. That can include a lot of different interventions. Keep in mind you can include the doctor sometimes in that conversation. Sometimes there's the option of having our loved one do a driving evaluation to more officially assess to see if they are okay to still be driving. When we do need to intervene, oftentimes the caregivers might need to take more extreme steps in terms of removing the keys, removing the car at some point, creating a bit of a care plan for someone's day. Can we keep them busy and kind of redirect them with things if we need to, if that becomes more of a challenge? And then just making sure again that that proper level of care is in place. Where do they need rides to? Can we ensure that they're still able to get to their appointments, be able to do the things that they want to do, socializing and whatnot? Back to what you had said before, Tiffany, that can be a way to, we're finding that balance of intervening where we need to, but still trying to keep someone independent in ways. So I would say driving, big, big topic. And then the other main, I guess, safety related call that we would get that I wanted to touch on that we haven't mentioned. It's a bit of a different type of topic, but scams, like financial scams. Someone with the disease sometimes can be more susceptible to being scammed financially or otherwise, especially if it's via phone calls. You know, the bad guys who are looking to do that sometimes have all kinds of ways to be able to make that happen. And keep in mind when someone with the disease, if their judgment, right, their reasoning, their decision-making abilities can be a bit off, especially over the phone, right? We kind of see how things can become a bit challenging there. So there could be different ways to intervene when it comes to trying to mitigate and prevent the financial scams. Keep in mind this is where an increased level of supervision oftentimes is necessary. It sounds simple, but it's true. Just making sure someone would be able to have eyes on that person, right? They can kind of step into intervene, right, where they would need to. We can kind of make a plan for someone's day to keep them busy, right, and kind of redirect them with different things. But there's also other creative ways that we can intervene in terms of, adjusting the phone, right? Sometimes, there's creative like blockers that we can put on someone's phone to maybe restrict, right, the types of calls that they're getting, finding that balance of, hey, they can still have access to the phone, but we're just trying to, right, block things where possible. And then maybe on the kind of the backside of things, if there is a caregiver involved to maybe oversee and manage the finances just to double check that everything is going okay there. I would say that's sort of a different type of call we get, but definitely one that falls into safety, in its own way.
Yeah, all of that makes so much sense. I think another aspect of home safety that we want to think about is emergency preparedness. It's so important to have a list for who to call in various situations. This can include 911, police, fire departments, hospitals, poison control centers, loved ones, or other care supporters who we should reach out to in situations. Also, knowing where local resources are and what's available to us can be really helpful as we're thinking about how to prepare for any type of situation, whether that's a weather related situation or something that may happen in the home. That can be very important. It's also important when we have these lists to make sure that these lists are accessible and easy to find for a person with the disease, especially if they're living alone, to make sure that they know how to find the list and they know how to reach out to people on the list to determine who can best help them. It's also important to consider that if a person is not able to utilize some of these safety things on their own, so we talked about the fire extinguisher, utilizing in the kitchen to be able to call for emergency services, then that's also a time to look at our care planning and seeing how we may need to change things if a person is able to safely reside on their own in their home, or if there are changes that we need to make, such as additional supervision or additional plans to put in place to make sure that the home stays safe. Another thing to really keep in mind or remember this time of year is the weather. As it's getting colder outside, we want to make sure that people are going outside, that they're dressed appropriately. So whether that's keeping warm enough or depending on where you live, ensuring that the person isn't dressing too warm for the weather can become very important. So making sure that they know how to access coats, shoes, boots, other accessories as necessary when they are leaving the house. And making sure someone has access to those anytime, as we also talked about wandering, to make sure that coats are in convenient places if a person should by some chance get outside, that they may still be able to know to put their coat on before they head outside so that there's a good reminder there. The other thing we want to think about is heat and different heating sources, making sure a person can stay warm enough this time of year, but also keeping in mind apparatuses that provide heat that could also lead to safety problems, such as space heaters and electric blankets, which themselves can also cause additional issues for safety that we want to be mindful of what we're using, how it's being operated, if there are safety off switches on these, or if this is something that maybe isn't so great for a person living with the disease to have in their environment any longer. Kristen, do you have any other thoughts or anything as we're wrapping up that you think is also important for people to keep in mind around home safety?
Think we touched on a lot of the main topics. I think I would just want to reiterate really, Tiffany, what you had been mentioning before. It's, a lot of these interventions, it can be overwhelming to think about, all of it at once, both I imagine for the caregivers, but also for the person living with the disease. But like Tiffany was explaining before, the goal of taking these steps really is to improve someone's quality of life, maintain it, right? Keep them safe, allow them to be as independent as possible, right? So if we're or thinking about these different changes we can make to someone's home, it can allow them oftentimes to live home for as long as possible if that is part of their goal. So it really, ties in with a lot of the steps that we talk about when kind of coming up with the care plan for someone living with this disease. So I think we touched on a lot of the main topics. I'm hoping folks find it helpful, especially like you said, this winter, the cold season, there's special things you want to be keeping in mind. So I'm hoping some of the tips we mentioned today are helpful.
Absolutely. Kristen, thank you for your time and expertise. We appreciate you joining us for this ALZ Talks. To all of you joining this discussion, we're so glad we were able to make time for this program today. Please remember to take a look at our home safety checklist. The Alzheimer's Association 24/7 helpline is available to anyone at 1-800-272-3900. Specialists are available around the clock, 365 days a year, and can provide assistance in over 200 languages thanks to bilingual staff and also translation services. They can help with things such as learning about the symptoms of Alzheimer's and other dementias, finding local programs and services, and speaking confidentially with master's level clinicians for safety planning conversations and education on issues families face every day. As always, if you have any additional questions or are looking for resources, email your questions to alztalks@alz.org. Thanks again to our panelists, and we hope you have a great brain healthy day.